157 Minecraft facts you possibly didn't know. Over the year, we've covered plenty of Minecraft trivia and facts. So today, we're joined by BlockFacts to go through some of our favorites and some new ones as well. And hey, the YouTube analytics magician told me that no one has ever subscribed to the channel with their left ring finger. And honestly, I don't know why anyone would, but if you're up to that challenge, place your Digitus Medicinalis on that sub button down below. It's free and it helps out a ton. Although villagers might not always give you the best deal, it seems like they're always more than willing to give you that deal. Since, as it turns out, we can see from this post that villagers have no range for trading. And a good way to test this is by using two different ender pearls while standing up at build height. Throw one to the floor and then one up into the sky, and that way when you land and start trading with the villager, you'll then be teleported up to the top, and you'll see that we didn't even interrupt our trading. And given that other workstation UIs usually have a range to them, like chests or crafting tables, it's weird that this is the case, but it also lets us build this cool design that we have over in the end gateway, so I'm not complaining. In Bedrock Edition, if you were to build a cycle of pistons like this and have them extend, then what you'll see, even though it's confusing, is this bug where you get teleported to x equals 0 on the axis. And while this is a pretty big glitch, and it could be pretty dangerous if used incorrectly, it could also make for some funny traps or pranks. I mean, think of it, you're just watching the block feed tape redstone machine, and then 1 second, you're instantly teleported to the middle of nowhere. No explanation, no feedback, it's great. Here we see a comparison between a full row of powered rails compared to what we have on the opposite, which is the most efficient no redstone torch or block railway that you can build. And the difference here is that we're only using powered rails and activator rails when we need to, and then spacing them out with 30 regular rails in between, which could help you save on gold if you don't quite have that piglin farm yet. But I gotta say, even though I know that both of these are equally fast, I'll still never be able to wrap my head around the fact that having entirely powered rails isn't the faster option. But that's probably just for my younger self building a bunch of roller coasters this way. Have you ever wondered how large the Minecraft end is? Because let's be honest, it's not exactly something that you can fit within your render distance. So that's why this post by Formerly Duck on Reddit is particularly interesting to see. And to put this into perspective, all those little black dots that you're seeing right down there, those are the obsidian pillars that tower over us on the end's main island. And if we were to zoom into how small we look over here, well, this gap might seem easy to cross on your screen. I guarantee you it's anything but. And that's why we usually just use the end gateway portals to get from point A to point B. Trying to do this by pillaring over using a flying machine, it's just the worst. It's impossible to stack stew in your inventory, or at least it would have been, unless you try something like this. Since while the stew itself is not able to be stacked, all of the ingredients within that crafting recipe are. So if you wanted to stack 64 suspicious stew inside of your inventory, all you gotta do is dedicate 4 slots. 64 dandelions, 64 brown mushrooms, 64 red, and 64 bowls. Which at that point, they should just let the stews stack up to being 16 in each slot. But maybe that's something for that inventory update that we hopefully get someday. This might look like a 3D model that we green screened onto this background, but it's actually made entirely out of particles, and a convenient program. Since as this post from the Minecraft Commands subreddit shows, we're able to use an external script to then take an animation from Blender, and then translate every vertex and its position and color data into a string of particle commands. Finally giving you that Minecraft GF that we've all been hoping for. And while in the past we've shown off this hologram making machine over here, I could say that even while I was looking at that, I'd never imagined something as animated as this. That's entirely special. This is the most efficient staircase that you can build in Minecraft, and really to say that you can build this is kind of a misnomer. Sure, all of these are blocks in Minecraft, and there's nothing particularly special about this, but when you look closely, the amount of luck that it would take to be able to place the dripstone and bamboo in this exact part of the block that they spawned on, yeah, that would just be impossible. At least not through the help of specific block state commands. But when you got it all built and climb up it with something like a horse, you can see this really is a fast staircase, letting us climb 8 blocks vertically for every 1 block horizontal, which definitely isn't as pretty as a spiral staircase, but it's also a whole lot faster to climb. I guess you sacrifice one for the other. Minecraft stone blocks have a lot of variants. The stone cutter will help you find out that. But it's also true that no one stone block type has all of these different variants. Now sure, they all have a basic one, but only a certain amount have a polished one, the most have bricks, and then even fewer and fewer have smooth, alternate, and special variants. And when you see that all laid out in a post like this, it is a little unsatisfying. And I'm sure that's why a bunch of mod developers have gone through this and filled in the gaps themselves. There's clearly a blank space, it's just up to you to fill it. In the 1.21 update, we're going to be getting a lot more copper items to play around with. I'm most focused on the creative menu, simply for the reason that if you search up copper now, since there's now exactly 9 items of variation here that we're seeing, it all lines up really nice in the creative menu search. Yeah, I'd be lying if I said that wasn't a little satisfying to see. If you live in a cold biome but you still want to have a farm, then keep this in mind, is that if you use waterlogged leaves instead of water source blocks in your farm, then those can still hydrate your crops, but the water won't freeze over. And while it's not exactly flowing water, you didn't really need that in the first place. I think this works out pretty well. If you take an extra close look at the top of the bone block texture, you can find this hidden design that starts to peek out. And honestly, the idea to tuck a skull inside of the bone block is maybe a little barbaric, but also pretty funny to see. If you were to stand next to a camel and turn on hitboxes, then what you'll notice is that the camel not only has the largest hitbox for a passive mob, but also that when you calculate the volume of both, that Steve's hitbox is less than 1/10 the volume of that of the camel. So if you only got one shot with a bow and arrow, aim for the hump instead of me, is all I'm saying. Early on into the development of the Warden, it was revealed by King B-Dogs on Twitter that it actually would burn up when it got into the sunlight, which honestly makes sense. It's a creature from the deep dark. I can imagine it not liking the sunlight that much. But I guess they decided against this when they made it a blind mob. I mean, you can't exactly hear light, at least not noticeably. So that, along with all these old Warden designs, got pushed to the wayside. Before archaeology got added in 1.20, it had been teased for 3 years prior to its initial release. And it looks like one of the things that Mojang couldn't decide on was how this brush was supposed to look, since it's had 3 different looks since it was initially released. This one with both a copper and an oxidized handle, this one that looked more like a paintbrush, and finally, the design that we've seen today. And honestly, I'm glad that we don't have to worry about another thing oxidizing for our copper. I don't exactly want to get struck by lightning while I'm holding one of these things. Clearly, Minecraft's textures have seen a lot of changes over the years, but one of the strangest of which is how wooden planks initially used to look. Since way back in the pre-classic days of Minecraft, when you crafted your oak into oak planks, you would have gotten something like this, which looks more than a little sad in both color and texture. But don't worry, it got even worse. Where after this we got this texture where it looked gray, if anything. And that might be good for dead wood, but it's not the kind of thing I want to use to build my house. And that's why it eventually became this texture that we know from Java Edition Classic. The first ever appearance of the Minecraft hanging sign actually came from Agnes's daughter. Yeah, no joke. As revealed in the Mojang Dev Diaries for 1.20, Agnes revealed that the initial design for the hanging sign came from this drawing that we saw from Agnes's daughter. Which, between this revelation and Jeb putting in polar bears because his wife liked them, I think it's clear to see that if you're a family member of Mojang, there's a non-zero chance that something related to you is going to end up in the game. And honestly, I just think that's really sweet. Did you know there could have been a 4th frog variant? Because looking at concept art for the frog before it was added in, there did exist a special blue frog that could have been added as well. Which, if you ask me, is a huge missed opportunity for not adding this in. At the very least, it could have given us another color of frog light, which it's always nice to have another building block. But really, even if this frog didn't get added in, at least all the ones that we have look so much better than the original frog texture. Ugh, that one's hideous.
In Bedrock Edition, if you put a trident in a dispenser, it'll be shot out as a projectile, which is a lot better than what happens in Java. Over there, it just drops as an item would. So for those of you on Bedrock Edition, consider adding this into your next deadly builds.
When chests were first added to Minecraft, they used to be a full block in size, which is different to the 14-pixel chest entities that we're familiar with today. And because they were a full block in size, you were able to place things like torches and redstone over the top of them, which is unfortunately something we lost now. But this old chest would have looked ridiculous if it was waterlogged, so maybe it's for the best that we got the newer option. If you have this potion in Minecraft, you're breaking the rules, because in vanilla Minecraft, there's no way to craft this potion. But if you use this give command to give yourself a potion with no NBT tags, it technically has no potion effect that goes along with it. But even if you can't get this item within survival, there is still a way to see it, since if you look at the icon for the local brewery advancement window, you'll see it's the same potion. So gone, but not forgotten.
Why is this wolf's tail spinning? It's not a glitch, but instead this is because the wolf's tail is linked to its health. So low health equals a lower tail, but the opposite also applies. So if you use commands to artificially increase the wolf's health, it'll start spinning like this. And thankfully it doesn't spin fast enough for the wolf to up and fly away. Then we'd have a real problem on our hands.
When skew was first added to Minecraft, it was originally called turtle shell pieces, which isn't all that surprising, it's what they are, but after some players pointed out that it's actually a more technical term to use the word skewed, then it was changed.
In the past, it was possible to damage the Ender Dragon with snowballs, which makes sense for the blaze, but it's a lot weirder to see this happen against the dragon. And Mojang agreed, since as of snapshot 15W32A, the dragon no longer takes damage from snowballs. But don't worry, they're still worth keeping around for taking out the end crystals. particles.
The next time that you're trying to cure your villagers, make sure to have this on your crossbow, since by using an arrow that's tipped in the weakness effect in combination with a piercing 4 crossbow, it's technically possible to cure 4 villagers at once. And better yet, when that arrow hits a wall, because you have the piercing enchantment, you're also able to pick it up and reuse it, giving you a violent but perhaps necessary way to cure all of your villagers in a cheap manner.
Soul Sand is creepy, but this is even creepier, since if you were to take the time to break a player head block, you can look closely and notice that the particle effects from breaking it are the same as the Soul Sand particles. I guess it's called Soul Sand for a reason. It's filled with the same stuff as Steve's skull.
In older versions of Minecraft, it used to be possible to buy the Eye of Ender item, and this made the Cleric Villager indispensable for speedruns, considering that with this trade, you didn't even need to go to the Nether to get Blaze Powder for your Eyes of Ender. But during the snapshots for Java Edition 1.9, this did get balanced so that you couldn't just skip this integral part of the game, which is a bummer, but I think speedrunners are doing just fine without it. Using this command, we're able to summon in a special wolf called Mars, which is a mob so rare, it only exists in the April Fool's version of the 1 block at a time update. But much like the special name tag for the rabbit variant named Toast, this gives you a different colored variant on the standard wolf skin, and hopefully this hints at getting different breeds of wolves added into the future. It wouldn't be the first time they took a feature from April Fool's and made it official.
This is Glow Lichen, and this is a block of Glow Lichen. Or it sure looks that way, but what's actually happening here is that by placing a piece of Glow Lichen on the ground and then rotating it with a debug stick, you'll have what appears to be a block of the lichen. What's most interesting about all this is that even with all this Glow Lichen, it no longer glows, which seems odd.
The Copper Horn never made it into Minecraft, and it only existed in an experimental snapshot for Bedrock for a short time. But even though it's been removed, if you use something like a data pack from this user, there does exist a way to revive the item. Now, unfortunately, that same data pack doesn't make it very useful, but in fairness, the item never was anyway, which is probably why it was removed.
If you put a camel inside of a minecart, it'll start playing its running animation indefinitely, which might make this the cheapest perpetual motion machine to make. It's at least the weirdest one I've seen, but if you have a saddle, you can also join in on the fun, so at least it's not exclusionary.
By this point, you've probably seen the globe banner pattern. It's not the most visually interesting, but it does have interesting ramifications. Since if you consider the fact that this is how the Minecraft globe looks, then that would mean that the Minecraft world is square and not round. So sorry, MatPat, I guess that your theory might not be true. At least according to the Cartographer Villager.
This beacon wasn't supposed to exist, but because of a glitch in 1.7.4, there was a way to get a black beacon before Glass could even change the beacon color. If you place 4 black wool around a beacon and then use a redstone clock and pistons to push the blocks over the top, there you have it, a black beacon before you were even supposed to have one.
This isn't a villager, but I wouldn't blame you if you thought so. But rather, this mob's called the NPC, and it only exists within the Education Edition. And while these do share a lot of visual similarities to the villager, they're actually a mob that exists only for map makers to make special qualifications, like having text pop-ups or even buttons to press that summon different commands. It's pretty cool, but if you don't add those, they have no AI and basically useless.
What would you call this item? Well, nowadays it's named the Glistering Melon. Prior to snapshot 18W20B, it was known in the game's files as Speckled Melon, which doesn't sound terribly appetizing, but neither does the word glistering, come to think of it.
Did you know this secret using trapdoors and lecterns? Because with the way that the blocks render, if you place a trapdoor on top of a lectern block like this, and then add a book to that lectern, the pages will glitch through the top of the trapdoor and make it look as if you have an arrow that's pointing the players in the right direction, which is definitely a neat discovery, and it's a cool way of adding a subtle hint to your friends next time that they get lost on your server. In the April Fool's snapshot for the 1 block at a time update, if you were to summon in an iron golem using this special name, then you'd notice that Billy Belong has its arms permanently extended into the air, which is actually a reference to one of the developers that works on Minecraft, which is an odd way to be memorialized, but it's not like the Dinnerbone name tag makes any more sense anyway.
This was the simplest duplication glitch in Minecraft's history. In 1.8, there was a bug where if you threw items on the ground and then logged out just as you picked them back up, you'd return to see double the items, which meant you could repeat the process again and again. You get the picture, it was a real mess.
Even though we can now craft bamboo into fence blocks like this, unfortunately those fences are always going to be thicker than the bamboo stem itself. But then again, this is only noticeable if you're able to get it to line up, because bamboo is randomly offset when you place it as well. So really, what seems like it would be a great combo is anything but that. So if you want it to line up, you're just going to have to break the bamboo stalk and craft it into whatever you're building out of. If we push this cat off a cliff, nothing happens, and thankfully so, otherwise it'd be a murderer. But the idea behind this is that cats tend to land on their feet, and that'd be why cats in Minecraft not only don't take fall damage, but even if they were to fall into a dripstone spike, they're still not going to get hurt, which is a pretty sweet deal. It's hard to say I'm not jealous.
When it was first added, the Nether Star could be destroyed by the Wither's explosions, meaning sometimes you'd beat the boss and wouldn't be able to find the reward. But now it's blast resistant, meaning it can't even be destroyed by a separate TNT explosion.
In Bedrock Edition, it's possible to keep parrots on your shoulder when you take flight with an elytra. Or rather, I should say, you're keeping them around where your shoulders should be. Since when you look at it from this angle, it really just looks like they're hovering in place. Which is a bit peculiar, but they're at least more loyal than the ones in Java Edition, who bail on you when you start to get any kind of speed.
This item breaks blocks faster than an Efficiency 5 Haste 2 shovel. You truly can't beat a torch when it comes to breaking gravity blocks. As you can plainly see from this comparison, even with a head start, the shovel still loses out to the torch, making this undoubtedly the better option, and not to mention that it's substantially cheaper.
Now, leaves are a transparent block, you're not supposed to be able to place torches on them. But back in Minecraft Alpha, if you changed your graphics setting to play with fast textures, then you could place a torch against the block, even if you were to change it back to fancy. But don't try to place it on fancy first, because then it would just crash the game. And while neither graphics option lets this work nowadays, you could always do it with the set block command. Did you know creepers are aliens? Well, not all of them, but this one certainly is. Since, thanks to an experiment done by the University of Southampton, students were able to send personal belongings into space. And one of those students sent a creeper. So when you look up into space, just know that somewhere out there was a creeper. And thankfully it didn't explode on the way up. Otherwise that wouldn't be as fun of a fact. If you didn't already think that the Skulk Shrieker was a creepy block, then maybe this will convince you. Because as it turns out, the block was originally designed after inspiration from the human larynx. That being the part of the throat that actually makes the noises when you shriek. Which makes sense when you think about it, but it's also pretty creepy to think of your blocks turning into some kind of living mass. I don't know, it weirds me out. Obviously, you're not supposed to break a crafting table with your pickaxe. But even Mojang wants you to know this fact, considering that if you use your tools where they're not supposed to, it'll deal double the durability damage to said tool. Meaning it's not just a waste, it's a double waste. And considering that certain tools don't even work better than your fist in this example, it's really just best to scroll to a different place on your hotbar and do it that way, saving both your tools and yourself from a headache.
You can kill this whole batch of zombified piglins without any of them getting angry. You just need to be precise. Since if you were to kill this mob in one hit, then it doesn't have the chance to update the universal aggression tag on the other monsters. That means with a strong enough weapon and a critical hit, you don't have to worry about upsetting the pack when you pick off a few.
If you're playing on a Minecraft server, pay attention to the cactus blocks, because if you were to walk into a desert and notice that most of the cacti nearby are 1 block tall in size, then that means that you likely encountered new land. Because otherwise, if someone had been there, they would have loaded the chunks and the cacti would have grown a little bit, which is a handy way to know if you're discovering new land or just retreading into someone's rejects. The Rascal and the Tough Golem might not have won the mob vote, but they are still in Minecraft, because in Bedrock Edition, there was a special free skin pack that was added in that would let you choose between different clothings for the 12 different skin, including the Rascal, the Sniffer, and the Tough Golem. So it's a far cry from the mobs actually being in the game, but it's a lot better than some of the other mob vote losers got, so I guess you take what you get. Here's why channeling is the most evil enchantment that you can use in Minecraft. Because if you were to put this on your trident and then kill one of your friends or foes, then on death, all of their items will be deleted from the inventory, which no doubt is devastating. So if you weren't able to trick your friend into putting Curse of Vanishing on their stuff, then I guess you could do this and essentially put Curse of Vanishing on their entire kit.
You've probably seen this item before, but not like this. With the use of commands, you're able to give yourself a physical knowledge book like this. And by using that item, it'll grant the player access to new recipes to try out with the other green knowledge book, the one that you find on the crafting screen.
Because lily pads are rendered so thin, if you were to run on top of a row of these, you'll notice that the particles that you give off from your feet are actually the water particles instead of the lily pads, which I actually think makes sense. It's like your feet are splashing up water instead of splashing up parts of the lily pad.
The Ender Dragon doesn't breathe fire, but it does have fire aspect. And you'll see that if you try to shoot a perched dragon with a bow and arrow, this time instead of your arrows colliding, they'll just bounce off. And just in case having your arrows bounce off wasn't enough of a reason to stop, the fire really makes it obvious to cut it out.
For a brief period in Minecraft Java, there was a time where you were able to craft both horse armor and horse saddles. And oddly enough, there was a unique item just for riding the horse with this saddle, meaning that even if you went through all the effort to get 5 leather and 3 iron ingots, you couldn't use this on a pig. And even stranger still, it could be stacked up to 32 in a stack, which again made it unique. But that didn't save this or the horse armor crafting recipes from getting patched out of the game shortly after.
How rare would it be to get all the wither skulls for a wither in one go? If you do the maths, to get 3 wither skeleton skull drops in a row, it would be a 1 in 64,000 chance. That's a 0.0015% chance, or in other words, highly unlikely.
Obviously, piglins don't exist, but their sound effects do come from a special kind of Swedish pig, the Linderötsfin, which when you read that out loud, it's easy to see why they went with the name piglin. Even with Google Translate, I'm not entirely sure how to say that one.
Because of the way hitboxes work, if you place an armor stand on top of a block and then drop it onto a fence post, it'll just float in place, which gives us a pretty pretty weird result. This is especially strange when you consider that armor stands don't float on slabs, snow layers, or even enchanting tables.
You might not have noticed this, but I don't know when you ever would have seen it. But on the off chance that you were to stand next to a cocoa bean and then let it grow, then it's true that as the cocoa bean gets bigger, it'll push the player down into crawl mode. That way you're not going to be suffocating when you stand next to it. But why you would be waiting right next to a cocoa bean to grow anyways? I've got no clue. The Warden's a strong mob, but just how strong is it? Well, it's so strong that if you were to add up the health of the Ender Dragon and the Wither combined, that's how many hearts the Warden has. Folks, that's 250 hearts of health for this one Warden. So you remember the fact that the Wither on Bedrock has 300 hearts. And sorry to any Bedrock players out there, that just sounds terrible to deal with. Even though the only way to craft a lodestone is to use a netherite ingot, unfortunately this expensive block isn't immune to fire or lava the same way that netherite is. It's not even like just the stone burns off and you get the netherite ingot back. The whole thing disappears, which could be quite the tragedy if you were to drop one of these in the nether. If you go to enchant your bow and go for a level 1 enchantment, then if you have no bookshelves nearby, the first level 1 enchantment will always be power 1. Seriously, try this on however many bows that you want, you're not gonna get anything else. Which might be helpful if you're looking for a low powered enchantment in PvP. It's better to have power 1 on your bow instead of unbreaking 1. So I'd rather go for the cheaper and simpler option in this case. Alright, pop quiz. Have you ever heard of the Minecraft mob, the Spark? If you haven't, then you probably haven't looked at the game's files, considering that only there's the Shulker's bullet called the Spark. But other than that, how would you even know this? It's not like it spawns with a name tag or anything, but there you go. Now you got something for your next Minecraft trivia night.
You would never notice this in regular gameplay, but one End Crystal is capable of healing multiple Ender Dragons at once. This becomes quickly noticeable when you summon in multiple dragons, as the crystal splits off different beams to heal the dragons.
If you were to line the bottom of a nearby riverbed using mud blocks, then that row of mud will cancel out the swimming animation, allowing you to just run like normal underneath the water. And this is due to the fact that mud actually renders you 1 pixel lower inside of the block, so you're not really running in water, you're running in mud. The reason that wandering traders were added to Minecraft was because of inspiration from other various RPGs. And one of the game's designers even confirms this in the article, Meet the Wandering Trader, which would be why you could find these in incredibly dangerous places, since they're meant to help offer you some kind of healing item like they do in the RPGs. Although it's hard to say that their items are nearly as desirable as the ones found in the other games.
Unlike the rest of the leather armor set, leather boots are the only piece that's named the same as the other armor sets, since the leather helmet is called a cap, the leather chestplate is a tunic, and the leather leggings are called pants, or trousers in the UK version.
Never craft this block, because while it might seem handy to compress your 9 netherwort down to 1 netherwort block, unlike other compressed material blocks, this can't be crafted back into its base material. And considering the fact that you're able to get these blocks from the Crimson Trees, I'd say it's better to save your netherwort for your potion farm. There's already going to be plenty enough supply of these the other way around.
Fire beats ice, but not in Minecraft, and you'll see as much when you try to use a flint and steel, since trying to ignite an ice block here won't result in any fire to see. But what's even more embarrassing is that this failed attempt will still waste the durability of the flint and steel.
Even though the Allay made it into Minecraft during the Wild update, it was originally planned all the way back for the Nether update. Although back then, it would have been called the Wisp, and it would have had a much different look. Even when it was renamed to the Allay and it was planned to be added in, there could have been different colors that we saw for the mob, which I'll say I'm disappointed that we didn't see. But you can find a yellow Allay that shows up in the Minecraft Legends trailer, so I guess the idea is still there. Within the game's files, the Heart of the Sea actually goes by a different name, and if you go searching for it, you can see that at one time during its development, the Heart of the Sea must have been called the Nautilus Core, which makes sense considering that you have to use that in combination with Nautilus shells to get yourself a conduit. So it's not like they made a crazy leap and change in the name, but considering the fact that Nautilus normally refers to some kind of mollusk, it makes you wonder if this is ever supposed to be dropped by a mob instead of found in a chest.
If you place a note block on top of a slab, that slab will change the sound of the note block even if it doesn't visually look like they're touching, which makes more sense if the slab is placed on the top half, but for a bottom slab like this, it just feels off.
While you get the most experience from cooking ancient debris in a furnace, you know what gives you the least amount of experience? Well, sure enough, if you're cooking up your chorus fruit or your kelp in a furnace, as an XP farm, you're wasting your time, considering that these items can give you an average of 0.1 experience points. And sometimes that means they'll give you no XP at all. And considering dried kelp isn't even that great of a food source, I don't think this is worth doing in the first place.
Have you ever seen a fox with a beard? Well, don't say I didn't warn you, but if you were to get your fox to hold a wither skull in its mouth, then you'll notice that it looks like the fox has a beard. Or if that's not for you, then get it to hold a skulk sensor and that'll look like a goatee.
This furnace only exists in Bedrock Edition, since in the past, if you had a Silk Touch pick and you managed to break a furnace while it was smelting, you'd be left with a unique item called the Lit Furnace. Though, make no mistake, this is definitely not intentional, considering when you hovered over the item in your inventory, the name had an underscore like it would show up in the game's files, and that's likely why this got patched out in the first place.
This is an Elder Guardian, and this is the Elder Guardian Ghost. Exclusive just to Bedrock Edition, this secret mob can only be spawned in using the summon command. But what does it do? Well, clearly not much. It doesn't even have a texture, and all that you're able to see is its shadow. Eerie. Mojang made this texture look even worse, but that was the point, since as of the texture update of 1.14, the fermented spider eye changed to look a lot more red and gooey than it did in the past, which is definitely more gross, but that's likely accurate to how a mix of spider eyes, mushrooms, and sugar would be in the real world anyway.
If you're able to get up close and personal to a camel's nose, you'll notice that when you look at it dead on, it actually seems to match the texture of a wither skull, which with Minecraft's resolution, it's tough to tell if this was intentional or just about the only way that you could make a camel's nose look right. But intentional or not, it's still a fun Easter egg. Why does this difference exist? Because as you'll notice, if you place a note block on top of an oak door, it'll change the sound that the note block plays. But place it on top of an iron door, no change. At the very least, you would expect it to play the same kind of instrument as the block of iron does, being the iron xylophone. And that would have been better anyway, because an iron door is a lot cheaper than an iron block, especially when you get 3 of them. Why is this minecart different from the others? Well, as it turns out, the minecart hopper has a slightly different texture as opposed to the other ones. And not just on top, but if you look at the bottom, you'll see that the hopper part of the minecart actually pokes through the bottom. Which makes sense, otherwise the items would just fill up into the basin, and that doesn't seem all that helpful. But if you didn't look at it from this point, I don't think any of us would have noticed.
If you were to ignite a piece of TNT mid-air and let it fall, how far could it fall before exploding? After running this test, you can see that it takes 72 blocks before the TNT explodes. So take this as a lesson before you build your next flying machine. If you go too high, your bombs won't be able to reach your friend's base below.
Before horses were added to Minecraft, there were horses. Notice the quotation marks. Because these special mobs were only in the Java Edition snapshots for the April Fool's update, and they were really just retextured cows and pigs, which did make for a good joke, but shortly after, Mojang worked with Dr. Jark to add in proper horses into the game, and thankfully they didn't look like this.
Mojang says they'll never add chairs to Minecraft, but that's just not true, since back in the InfDev version of Minecraft, there did exist a chair texture within the game's files, though this was never fully coded in, so I suppose that means Mojang is also telling the truth. Let's call this one a draw.
Here's how to light up your igloo without turning it into a water waste. Since while it's true that things like glowstone and torches are going to melt the snow, if you were to use redstone dust, torches, or even candles and soul torches, none of those will melt any of your ice or snow, giving you the perfect way to illuminate your Fortress of Solitude, and also keep it a Fortress of Solitude by making sure no mobs can spawn inside.
Put away your axe, you won't need it for this, since this isn't your average oak wood slab, but instead this is a secret item called a petrified oak slab, and it only exists in old legacy worlds or by using commands to spawn it in. And the difference is that for these, you don't harvest them with an axe, but rather you use a pickaxe.
What happens if you smelt mushrooms? Well, in every other version, nothing. You don't even need to cook them for mushroom stew. But in Pocket Edition, it used to be possible to smelt red mushrooms to get, well, red dye, which seems like a lot of hassle to go through considering that you could just craft a rose and get the same results. In current versions of Minecraft, there's no way for the Ender Dragon to defeat the Warden, and that makes the biggest boss in Minecraft really feel like a lightweight, especially considering that with enough Wardens, you were once able to blast the Ender Dragon completely off course, making the final boss of Minecraft feel a lot more like an afterthought. Although goats in Minecraft can tend to break off their horns when they run into a wall, that's not actually based on anything in real life, because the truth is that goats' horns are actually a part of the animal's skull, so if they were to break off, the goat would have bigger problems. And really, this behavior in Minecraft much more closely resembles a deer with its antlers.
If you're trying to hide from your foes, consider crafting a chest or a sign. Since these are rendered differently from typical blocks, if you stand behind one, your name tag doesn't render as usual. This gives you a way to hide from the competition without holding down the sneak key, which is better for secrecy and for your fingers, honestly.
This enchanted book is not supposed to exist, because it's enchanted with, well, nothing. And the only way that it's possible to get such an illegal item is by using this command to give yourself an enchanted book with no other NBT tags. And there you go, it's enchanted, yet pointless.
Rails behave in an odd way, but you'll have to listen closely to notice it, since when you run over rails placed on the ground, it'll play the sound effects of the block under the rail. But if you only walk or jump on top of the rails, then you'll hear the sound of iron.
Back in version 1.3, Flint used to look 3D, and if you studied it closely, you could see that the item had a shiny texture to it. But all of that changed in snapshot 18W43A, where the Flint item was changed to be a little bit more 2D, and that same shiny texture seemed to have gone away, making it look a lot less like a Minecraft diamond and and a whole lot more boring. You might not notice it now, but when creepers were first added to Minecraft, they were able to camouflage. And a lot of this was because the original creeper texture actually matched the alpha grass texture that we can see here. So when standing next to the standard foliage, these creepy mobs really did fade into the background. And that made it even tougher to try to pick one of these out during the early versions. But as the textures got updated and the grass color maps changed, creepers stayed the same. And unfortunately for them, now they stick out like a sore thumb. This was once one of the rarest blocks in Minecraft, at least one of the rarest to find, because prior to version 1.8, chiseled bricks didn't have any kind of crafting recipe. So the only way that you'd find one of these outside of a creative mode menu would have been inside of a jungle temple, which alone is rare, and they exist within jungle biomes, which also happen to be rare. So you're gonna have to go through quite the journey just to build with one of these in your world, and thankfully now they have a crafting recipe. But tracking down the chiseled stone bricks isn't their only annoyance, since due to the fact that Minecraft textures are 16 by 16, this pattern was bound to have some asymmetry, and that would be why the center of this block isn't actually in the center. And this is one of those where I'm afraid once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. And unfortunately, a cobblestone wall like this doesn't make it any easier to look at. Much like the chiseled bricks, dried kelp also isn't symmetrical. And unfortunately, the rope that's tied around the dried kelp block is offset by 1 pixel, which gets really noticeable as soon as you lean in and pay attention to it. Which is too bad, but I also don't figure that dried kelp's the most popular block out there, so you're probably not going to notice this on a day-to-day basis.
In Bedrock, golden apples are substantially better than they are in Java. In this version, an enchanted golden apple gives you the Regeneration 5 effect instead of just Regeneration 2 in Java Edition. Though with how many random ways there are to take damage in Bedrock, the extra regeneration might be more appreciated.
If you were to throw out all of your items onto the ground in a specific order, then you'll notice that as soon as you go to try to pick them up, the items will enter your inventory in the exact same order that you threw them onto the ground. And this becomes instantly noticeable when you play something like PvP, and you have to throw out different items onto the ground to try and sort through your inventory in Hunger Games. So if you forgot to pick up that pair of chainmail leggings the first time around, don't worry, it's gonna cycle back and all will be clear.
In the experimental snapshots for 1.20, typing in the command to summon a bat would get you this. The bat would be upside down even while floating in the air. And surprisingly, this odd behavior causes the mob to glitch out quite a bit, making bats even more useless than they already were.
When the drowned was first added to Minecraft, it looked a lot different, since the original concept for the drowned mob had it looking like a half skeleton, half zombie mix, which is not only a lot creepier, but it also blends in pretty well with the dirt that you see at the bottom of the riverbed. Though I suppose it makes sense why it was changed, because this feels a little too gory for Minecraft. But it worked for the zombie pigmen, so who's to say? If by some way you were to get water inside of the Nether dimension in Bedrock Edition, then because of the way the biomes are coded, the water will actually turn red in color, which is weird that they would have such a difference between Bedrock and Java in this way, but since it's not an intentional feature to have water in the Nether anyway, I'm really just amazed that they went through the effort of changing the color in the first place.
When lava spreads, it can trigger a tripwire hook, which allows for some pretty creative traps if you're devious enough. But keep in mind this is just a one-time deal, since that lava will break the string and tripwire hooks in the process. So if you're going to use it, make sure it kills them on the first go.
While we choose to get our cocoa beans from the jungle, in Pocket Edition, the way they used to get these was by crafting it together with an ink sac, a red dye, and a dandelion yellow, which is a really peculiar sight to see laid out like this. But I guess the idea was that you were trying to mix together different dyes to get a brownish color. And that much makes sense, but to get cocoa beans themselves, then it just seems so weird, and you can see why they patched it out. Minecraft doesn't have dominoes, but it does have hanging signs. And what we're able to do with those is have a hanging sign supporting underneath another hanging sign. So if you take that to its logical extreme, you can have a whole chain of these things only going from one hanging sign support. So all it's gonna take is breaking one of those, and that whole domino chain falls apart. By this point, everyone's familiar with the rarest mob in Minecraft, but this mob can also be very rare, considering that there's only a rare chance that an Arctic fox even spawns in a snowy taiga biome, and then add on to that another 5% chance of that fox being a baby variant, and it gets to the point where if you find one of these, buy a lottery ticket. Your luck's pretty good. For some reason, bell blocks are taller in Java Edition than they are in Bedrock, and while that's the case, I honestly have no clue. What I do know is that if you ring the bell underneath this video, it'd be much appreciated. This flower looks illegal, but it used to spawn in version 1.8, and the reason for this strange sight is that when the game generates where the plant should be on the plains biome, it does that before the puddles are actually generated into the world. So while it might have thought that there was supposed to be a flower there, when it later decides that there should be a lake there as well, it deletes the grass block, and now you've got this floating flower head like this, which is strange, but it's actually a lot closer to how the item renders when you place it on the floor, which ends up being a nice coincidence, even if it was an error in the code. This is an iron golem, and this is the love golem. If you put together 4 iron blocks and a carved pumpkin on top, you'll of course get the love golem. Exclusively found in the Love and Hugs update, this special mob is meant to be a manifestation of the villagers' love, and that's probably the reason why it's passive toward any players or even hostile mobs, which which, yeah, does mean that it doesn't do much. But in fairness, we can't attack mobs in this joke update either, so at least it's not alone.
Unlike us, arrows don't slow down while passing through cobwebs, nor do snowballs or ender pearls, which might just mean that the fastest way through a cobweb trap is to shoot your shot instead of wasting time with a sword.
What would you think is the strongest mob in Minecraft? Well, it might seem like the Warden, considering that it only takes 3 hits to kill you in full netherite enchanted armor. The crown for this would actually go to a charged creeper. Considering that on hard difficulties, this can do 127 damage. And for that much, you probably want to have a good set of blast protection armor, or at least a Totem of Undying as a backup call. This villager was never seen in Minecraft, but if you go within the game's files, there sure enough is an unused texture for the Angry Villager mob, featuring red eyes and angry eyebrows. And even though villagers can still get mad in the game if you were to punch them, even with all those particles, it's still not nearly as intimidating as one of these.
Can you spot the difference between this crossbow and this one here? If you can't, don't worry about it. You're not supposed to. While it's possible to tell the difference between a crossbow with a firework and one with an arrow while they're in your hotbar, this sprite change doesn't show up if the item's on the ground or in an item frame.
If you don't have the extra materials to make a sign or an item frame, then it is possible to name your chest in this way, since any container item will retain their name in the UI screen if you were to name them in an anvil. And considering that you can name a whole stack of these at once, it could be pretty cheap overall. At the very least, it's just an easy way to sneak in a funny message for your friend and wonder if they'll ever notice it. While in creative mode, it's possible to add any enchantment that you'd like to any item, including items that can't be enchanted normally, which means that if you really wanted to, you could get yourself a fire aspect water bucket, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but at least you're offering both the problem and the solution.
It's impossible to turn a squid upside down with a Dinnerbone name tag. Now don't be mistaken, you can still name a squid Dinnerbone or Grum, but you won't see any visual difference. Even Mojang doesn't know which way's the right way up for this mob. It's just that silly.
This texture tweak was small, but it made a big difference, because when Mojang first added in observers, their arrows used to point the other direction, which is definitely confusing to see when you look back at it nowadays, but it must have been confusing at the time, since shortly after they would flip around the arrow texture so that it now matches what it is today.
This mob doesn't exist, so why is there a spawn egg for it? The truth is that the mask isn't some secret new mob, but really it's just that this sprite is the base texture Mojang uses to color shift for the other spawn egg textures. I suppose that means we'll have to look for hidden lore elsewhere. Don't smelt your ancient debris, but rather you should save it for your redstone machines. Ancient debris has the same blast resistance as obsidian, but unlike obsidian, we can move our ancient debris with a piston, which makes machines like this not only possible, but also highly effective. Plus, if you consider the upside to having a tunnel bore, it's worth missing out on some netherite scraps.
During the development stages of Minecraft, the axe looked a little different, since back in Minecraft in dev, the axe's texture was double-sided like a battle axe, which seems pretty impractical when you're just trying to cut down a tree that's right in front of you, which is probably why the texture was changed just a few days later, and then changed again so that it faced the other way that we're now familiar with.
You can craft honey bottles into honey blocks. That's not a surprise, that's how you get them in the first place. But with those same 4 glass bottles, you can craft the honey blocks back into the bottle. This makes perhaps the weirdest way to store your honey, and the fact that this can be uncrafted while nether wart blocks can't seems even stranger.
If you don't have a compass, try looking out for some pumpkins. Crazy as that might sound, the pumpkin stem is always rendered in such a way where it's facing towards the northwest direction. And there you go. Even if you don't have a north star, you've essentially got a north squash. So if you know what direction your base is, this will at least help you get back on track, which is all particularly helpful if you don't have something like the debug screen if you're playing on Bedrock. This Minecraft mob has no AI, and the reason for that is because that's your job. You see, in the Education Edition for Minecraft, this robot called the Agent is a mob that's specifically designed to teach players how to code. And with that, you can teach this mob to do different things like harvest your crops, place blocks, and a whole number of other things, which is a lot cooler than just looking at Microsoft Visual Studio, so I'll take that trade-off. When armor was first added to Minecraft, it looked like this, because on August 13th of 2009, Notch added in plate armor to the Java Edition Classic, which looks to me like if you tried to make iron armor out of smooth stone. But this is what it would look like if the player wore it, and they even tested it out to see how it would look on zombies or skeletons. Although when first added, it was purely cosmetic, and it had no impact on their actual health and gameplay. Water in the nether's clearly unintentional, but for a time, you could get it legit. For a brief moment during the snapshot 21W03A, if you placed a glow-lichen plant into the same space as a lava source block, that lava would turn into water. And this is because of faulty code where they were trying to make it so glow-lichen could be waterlogged, but never accounted for it being lava-logged. But as soon as this glitch was discovered, it was quickly patched out and never made it into a full release.
Minecraft's glowstone used to look like this. It had a yellow-green color when it was added in the alpha stage, and wasn't changed until the texture update of 1.14. And between that change and the retexture for Netherrack, 1.14 really made the nether look a whole lot different.
If you listen closely to this sound that the fox makes, You'll notice that when the fox screeches, the first and third sound that it plays are actually the same, but the third sound effect is reversed with a lower pitch. And funnier still, the fox sounds actually never came from a real fox. They're just heavily edited sounds combined from dogs and cats.
This is the shortest block in Minecraft, though from this point of view it might be hard to see that it's even there. But if we move over here, you'll notice that the lily pad is only 1% the size of a normal block. And on the other end, the tallest block you can place would be the door, standing at 2 blocks tall, exactly.
If you were to place a water source block next to a non-full block like mud, soul sand, or the like, and then walk forward into a wall, you'll notice that because the block isn't a full 16 pixels in size, we'll just start to bounce up and down indefinitely because of the water. And this is also the reason why you never want to bridge out of soul sand when you're going through a lava lake, because it's too low, you're gonna catch on fire. While in creative mode, if you were to shoot an arrow above your head, obviously it's not gonna hit you. But this also doesn't mean that the arrow disappears, so what you get as a result is that the arrow will continue to try and bounce on top of your head, just glitching there in place. Which notably is the same thing that happens when you try to land an arrow on top of an enderman. They also can't get hit, so you kinda just get an arrow hat.
Hopefully you've never let all the villagers die during a raid, but if you did, here's what you'd see. After all the villagers are gone or the beds in the village are destroyed, the raiding vindicators will celebrate their victory by laughing and then raising their arms into the air, which really adds insult to injury. So to keep your village and your ego intact, just stay away if you have the bad omen effect.
If you were to line up the textures of bedrock blocks just right, you'll notice a hidden detail that starts to poke out of the blend, and it becomes instantly more noticeable when we highlight it like this. Sure enough, there's a wither skull that pokes through the texture, which, intentional or not, is a fun detail. While playing in peaceful mode, you won't see a lot of undead mobs, but 2 are still possible, those being the zombie horse and the skeleton horse mobs. However, to get these in the mode, you'd have to use the summon command. And at that point, is it even worth saying that these exist in peaceful mode? Because without operator commands, they really don't. Before you try fishing, you should look up first, since if you're fishing in an area where you don't see clear sky above the water, that'll double your waiting time. So while it might sound safe and convenient to fish inside a cave, it's not going to be that convenient having to wait double the time as opposed to fishing up on the surface. Not to mention the fact that you also get a bonus when it rains outside. So don't waste your time and just move your bobber upstairs.
You can't shear a baby sheep, but with a command you can summon a baby that's been sheared. And it looks pretty cursed. Plus it really shows how long the sheep's head is under all that wool. And no amount of wool blocks is worth having to look at this sad sight.
Pop quiz, what block is shorter than a slab? Actually, it's a cauldron, because clearly the block itself when you place them side by side doesn't look that much smaller, but rather when you stand inside of a cauldron, then you'll be standing at half the height of someone who's standing on top of a slab.
Unlike grass, if you place a block on top of podzol, it will never decay into a dirt block, no matter how long you wait, unlike its mycelium or grass counterparts. But you can get plenty of this with a 2x2 spruce tree, so I'm not all that worried about missing out on a podzol supply.
If you were to have a Minecraft clock in your inventory and then change the time using commands, you'll notice that the clock has to rapidly spin to catch up to what the current time is. And as is in a regular Minecraft day, each of those 64 frames of animation is only going to play for about 19 seconds a frame, given that a full Minecraft day is 20 minutes. Diamonds and spawn eggs share the same texture, and if you can't notice it from here, maybe this example makes it a bit more obvious. And it's not just the spawn eggs that share the same shape as the diamond, but also the turtle egg as well, which I didn't notice until it was pointed out, but now I'll never be able to unsee it. If you look closely at certain villagers' heads, you'll notice they might be wearing some pretty weird hats, like the librarian villager for instance, which, while it might look like a fez, actually is a book when you look at it from the right angle. And while it might look like the swamp villager has a bonnet on or something like that, it's actually just a lily pad just splayed over the top of their head, which honestly makes me jealous. I wish I could wear these as well. And if you're jealous of their style, don't worry, with the /item replace command, you could also wear those kind of books as hats as well. This is one of the rarest items in Minecraft, and why is that? Well, the truth is that even though tall grass as a block exists all around us in the world, when you break it, you only get regular grass. So to actually get the tall grass item, you'd have to luck out and find it in something like a villager loot chest, which seems like a lot of effort to get this item, but if you're trying to get all of them, you should remember this stipulation.
In the snapshots for 1.20, it's possible to duplicate any book as many times as you want. After you've filled up the new chiseled bookshelf block, simply click it again with whatever book you please. So if you were to use an auto-clicker here, you'd be able to get some pretty ridiculous results.
Stop using a sword to try and break cobwebs, because instead, it's possible to break these even faster by using a water bucket. So next time that you're stuck down in a spider's domain, it'd be better to pour out some flowing water instead of wasting any durability on your diamond sword. The water's also a lot more reusable, so I doubt there's any objections. As of the snapshots for 1.19, we can now have 3 players riding in a boat. Since if you get the new camel mob inside of one of these boats, then you can have one of your friends steer, and then you and another friend holding onto the back. And at that point, it technically seats 4, because the camel gets to come along as well. And then if you get some parrots on your shoulders, then I guess even more friends could come along for the journey.
The bee was supposed to be much smaller. As shown in this official video put out by Mojang, an early design for the bee would have had it closer in size to the baby turtle, but that's still more appealing than its first design. And when you can't tell if you're looking at the bee's front or its rear, you know you've got to change the look.
Here's why endorods are useful when they're horizontal, but not as much when they're vertical. Because when it's horizontal, you're able to drop falling blocks on top of it and it'll break them like so. Much the same way that a torch or slab would, but place it upright instead, and the falling blocks can fall right into place without ever breaking.
The reason parrots dance when you play a music disc is because of the party emoji's animation, which itself is based on this iconic gif of a kakapo, or owl parrot, dancing. With 3 TNT in a row, you can craft the Ethos Lab. This joke item, unsurprisingly named after Minecraft YouTuber Ethos Lab, was a part of the April Fool's update Minecraft 2.0, and while it behaved almost exactly like a regular TNT block, you can never be too careful around Etho.
Instead of draining an ocean monument using sand, why not use pistons? Since the fact of the matter is, a powered piston is able to destroy water source blocks, which means that if you have the slime on hand to make this kind of water-moving robot shown off by RVR, you can drain out entire oceans without ever touching sponge, sand, or any of that other stuff. And personally, I'll never complain about having an automatic option.
Unlike zombies, the husk can't transform into the drowned mob, but it can become a zombie. So by having a husk underwater for 30 seconds, it'll eventually turn into a zombie. And then after an additional 30 seconds, that same zombie will now be a drowned. Meaning if you've got a minute to spare, you've got yourself a drowned.
This isn't Steve, but actually this is the unused human mob from Minecraft. Back in early developments of the game, there did exist a hostile mob that looked identical to Steve. But even though they were hostile, it's hard to say that they were intimidating, considering that spawning these in would just cause them to move around all janky. And when you watch that old footage, I think it's plenty clear to see why they removed them from the game.
In 1.19, we have chickens that lay eggs, and in Minecraft 2.0, we've got chickens that lay diamonds. That's no joke, although it was meant to be. Back in April Fool's 2013, Mojang added this blue chicken to their fake snapshot that could lay diamonds and lapis lazuli, which sounds great, but be careful since these also had a tendency to explode.
If you were to take the time to set up all the prismarine blocks to fully power up a conduit, then you'd notice that the conduit block inside actually gives off the same light level as glowstone. But really, if you're going through all that effort to try and light up your local lake, why wouldn't you just use that prismarine to make a sea lantern? Or better yet, use the actual glowstone that you would need to make the sea lanterns and just use that because obviously glowstone's as bright as glowstone. Or the real cheapest option, 4 sea pickles gives off the exact same amount of light, a level of 15.
If you're running away from a piglin, don't bother closing that door. Since shocking as it may be, piglins are actually smart enough to open up doors. There aren't even doors that spawn in the nether. How did they learn to do that? So for your safety, stick to trapdoors and fence gates. They can't figure those out yet.
This block only exists in Pocket Edition, or at least it used to, because nowadays this block looks a whole lot different, and it's the stone cutter they're all used to. But sure enough, when it was first added into Pocket Edition, it did used to be a full block in size, looking a lot closer to a furnace than anything that we're used to today. And while the old texture was boring, it looks a lot easier to stand on, so it might have been nice to have a safer option.
This mob still isn't in Minecraft, but back when the creator was developing it, he talked about adding in a special red dragon that could exist outside of the end. And while it's unclear if this mob will be added in since the creator's departure in 2014, Jem has mentioned that if it were to be added, it would be tied to the dragon egg you get from the current dragon fight.
Before any other slab was added to Minecraft, the first of the bunch was actually a dirt slab. But even though it was the first, it never made it past any of the older versions, which is definitely a shame for builders, but with a texture like this, it might have been too distracting to build with anyway.
If you ever see a chicken in the ocean, count yourself lucky, since there's a very small chance of a drowned mob being able to spawn on the back of a chicken like a baby zombie does. And besides, it's obvious they were forced there. It doesn't seem that the chicken likes the water very much anyway.
Unlike every other block that you'll break with a shovel, snow blocks are the only one that specifically requires shovel to be broken successfully, since the rest you could either do by hand or use something like Silk Touch. But snow blocks, no luck, it's shovel or nothing. And with that folks, YouTube thinks that you might like this video, so see if they're right and have a good one, alright?